Right, so today I'm going to tie a very South African fly. I don't think anyone else in the world even really knows about it. And it's a variation on the RAB, Red Ass Bastard, and it's the Para-RAB version. It's not the easiest fly to tie, it's not the most difficult either, but I wouldn't suggest trying it if you're a complete beginner at dry flies. There are a lot of things that need to go right to produce a nice Para-RAB. It can be both frustrating and very rewarding to tie. If you don't know the tricks, it's going to be an absolute pain, so I'm going to try and show you the tricks. It might be a little bit difficult to get them all on camera, but I will try and explain them if they're not on the screen. Tying in size 16 today, using the grip 11011BL, one of my favorite hooks for dry flies. But the hook choice is up to you. Fulling mill make a very nice dry fly hook, Hanak as well. Now I'm going to make the tail out of dark Pardo Coq de Leon. It's my favorite color. I just love the barring on this. I'm going to use 4 or 5 fibers. And you're going to tie this in starting near the front. You're going to bury the bulk here. So I know Gordon van der Spey went through a stage of making the tail very long and then making the tail very short for these Para-RABs. I'm not sure what he's doing at the moment. I like to make it probably somewhere between the length of the hook shank and 1.5 times the length of the hook shank, so I'll make it like that probably. I'm going to pinch wrap it in, just 2 wraps like that, just to hold it in place. And you're going to take some holographic red tinsel. You don't need to do this, I just love how it looks. You can use red thread. You don't even really need to use the red butt. I'm not sure how much difference it really makes, to be perfectly honest. You're going to tie that in. 2 wraps. And then you can prepare a stripped peacock feather so long. Just like that. And then, I mean, this stuff can be a little bit brittle, so what I do is I just put it in my mouth, and it makes it a lot softer, and then it won't crack. So just for a few seconds while I wrap its tail and make the tag. Right, so now that you've wrapped to the back, you're going to put one wrap of thread underneath the tail like this. Pull it up and just pull the thread right up there underneath the tail. And this just makes the tail look quite nice. It holds the tail up, it spreads it out a little bit, just really makes it more natural. You can then wrap a couple of times forward. Now you're going to take your red tinsel, do a couple of wraps like this. Wrap it twice. Trim that off. Now you have your strip peacock hook. Tie that in. You're going to want to tie it in for the length of the body, so don't trim off that tag, because you want that tag to build up just enough bulk that your body tapers the correct way. If your body doesn't taper the correct way at this point, you can just use a little bit of thread to make a nice shape. You don't want it to be too bulky though. It is a dry fly after all, and it's quite a wispy little dry fly. And trim off this excess tail like this. Now you are going to want to wrap your strip peacock. It's not the greatest quality, this peacock, but it'll do. Then you want to tie it in there, and you'll see this body isn't that long. I've left quite a lot of space open at the front. Probably a third. I've left about a third of the shank open, maybe a quarter. Right, now this isn't currently a very strong body, so what I do is I put some glue over it, and I will let that glue then dry before I continue to tie. In this case I'm using super glue. You can also use a thin UV resin if you like. That stuff's expensive. It's also not necessary. It probably adds more bulk than is necessary, so just some super glue is great. And now before we continue, we're going to let that dry. Once the body has dried, you can tie in the legs. Now you tie in the legs before the post or anything, because you can then use the post to bury the bulk here. There are a lot of materials, but you still want to keep this fly quite nice and sparse, with quite sort of wispy. So you're going to take some squirrel tail like this. You probably want about 12 to 16 fibers, I would say. You can just estimate. Yeah, that'll do. That's maybe still slightly thick. Maybe pull a couple of those out. Right, like so. Then you take your deer hair stacker, you put them in the deer hair stacker, and you line up the tips. This is one of those small details that makes quite a big difference to the overall look of the fly once it's finished. Tips don't align quite as fast as deer hair, so it takes a little bit of effort. There, they're sort of aligned well enough. You're going to take them by the tips. And you're going to do a pinch wrap with them facing forwards. Oops. You want them to be on top of the shank like this. And you can pull out the couple of hairs that aren't aligned nicely like that. Once you've got the length right, so you want the length to be so that if you were to fold them back, they would line up, the tips here would line up with the tips of the tail if you were to fold them back. That's about the length you're looking for. And then tie them down properly. And you make sure that you tie them down all the way to the front of the hook. You know, down the bend of the down eye like that. These are now nice and secure. Take the excess here and trim it. Now you can take your post material. I use Antron. And today I'm going to make a bi-colored post. I'm going to have white around the outside and a bit of pink in the center. That just means if a fish sees it from the side, chances are they won't see the pink. If that might spook them off, who knows. But because you're seeing it from the front and the top, you will see the pink, and the fluorescent pink really stands out nicely on the river, so it makes the fly very visible while not spooking fish. So you partially tie in the white first, and you tie in the pink on top of the white, like that. You pull it up, trying not to catch your legs, which can be a pain. And you start to wrap like this. Once I've got it bunched like this, I will do figure 8 wraps around the base. And building up a little bit of thread here stops the post from spinning around the hook shank. Not sure why, it's just like that. If your thread starts to get a bit twisted, you should probably unwrap it. It's another one of these small things that makes quite a big difference, because if your thread's too twisted, it doesn't lay flat on the hook shank, or in this case the post, and that can affect how your hackle sits, and it just does make a difference to the overall neatness of the fly. So I try untwist my thread every now and then when I notice it's not laying flat. Now you're going to take your hackle. In this case I'm using Grizzly. It looks amazing with Coachman Brown though, I just don't happen to have. And it doesn't really matter, you know, whatever colour you prefer, stick with that. Now you're going to measure your hackle, and you want your hackle to come to sort of, yeah, that fiber's a bit bent. Anyway, you want your hackle to come to the base of the tail. This one is maybe slightly long, but it's good enough. You just don't want it to extend past the bend of the hook. If it extends past the bend of the hook, then it's far too long. You also don't want it to be much shorter, otherwise your fly just begins to look ridiculous. So now you're going to strip the base like this, and then you are going to strip one side of the hackle just for a couple of millimeters. And this is going to be, the side you strip is the side that's going to be wrapped stem down when you start wrapping. So if you're facing the fly and you're tying in the hackle on the side of the hook you're facing, you want the convex side of the hackle to be facing you, and you are going to be stripping the side of the hackle that faces the tail in this case. Tying in the hackle so that the convex side faces you means that when you start wrapping, the slight curve of the fibers makes the hackle face slightly up. If it faces slightly down, you've got quite an odd looking fly, and also the thread starts to catch it, the previous turn of the hackle starts to catch it, and you're going to get something very, very ugly. Now, you've seen me use markers to make a neat looking fly before. And once again I'm going to do that. I'm going to use some black marker just to make this thread black here, because the dubbing that we're going to use now is a sort of black peacock spectra type dubbing, and it's going to be quite sparse as well, so if the underbody is white you'll often see it coming through. If it's black, you can get away with a much less bulky thorax without seeing the underbody. So I've marked my thread black as well. I'm going to be using this. But Hens makes a similar one, and you know, go with what you like. You're not going to use a lot of it at all. I'm going to make it very thin. I think I already have too much on here, but let's see how it goes. Right, so this is quite bulky actually, but I'll stick with it. You can make it a lot less bulky than this. You're then going to start to wrap your hackle. Now the reason I stripped a few millimeters of one side is that your first couple of wraps, the hackle isn't laying flat, and if you don't strip one side you start getting a couple of stray fibers sticking out the top. So just stripping a couple of millimeters makes quite a big difference to how much cleaning up you have to do afterwards. Now, because you've made your thread black and you've got a fine dry fly or fine thread for tying dry flies, you can actually just wrap it over the dubbing to take it to the hook eye. I know, once again, cheating, and it's a horrible technique, but no matter how closely you actually look at this fly once it's done, you'll notice you can't see that thread wrap I've done over the dubbing. It just sinks straight in, and because I've made my thread black, it doesn't stand out. Going to apply a bit more black marker to my thread. At this point it isn't important at all. I just prefer the head to look black. Now, this is where you've got to try and make the legs form a halo, and this is what a lot of people struggle with. Okay, I seem to have bumped the camera. This is what a lot of people struggle with. There's a very simple technique to get this right. I like to trim my posts at an angle like that. It makes them a bit more visible. Now you've got all of these legs facing out the front, and a lot of people just sort of tie them back. So let me just trim this one leg here that's not nearly as long as the rest. Take that off. So you've got your legs like this. You lower the camera. And you're going to split them into 3 bunches of equal size. Like that. One bunch facing forward, and then one over each side. Now, unfortunately, I have to turn it away, just so I can tie it so that I can see. And once you have your 3 bunches, you're going to pull one that side, hold it there with your finger, grab it with your thumb and your middle finger, actually just pushing it with your middle finger, get it to really fan out there. Take your next, okay. You're going to do the side facing you first. You're going to pinch that, you're going to hold it there with your thumb. You're going to take your next one, you're going to hold it along the other side. So now you can pinch with your thumb and your middle finger, and you've got one bunch along each side. Then you're going to take your legs at the front, you're going to push them up, you're going to bring your first finger, and you're going to hold them like this. Don't worry about squashing your hackle, it comes back to shape. Now bring your bobbin right up to the eye, and you're going to wrap with and build up a head over the butts of the squirrel tail. And that holds them back. So now you have something looking like this. Now I take super glue and I apply it to the head. To trim the thread off. Now you have a fly that looks like this, which isn't great. So now you pull that front bunch forward and you'll find it naturally wants to spread out a bit. And you just sort of play around with the legs a bit, the side bunches. You don't want to pull the whole side bunch forward, but you sort of pull a few of the fibers around, and you end up having a very, very nice looking halo effect. And that super glue of the head on the head also helps to hold the legs in place once it's dried. So you want to be spreading the squirrel tail while the super glue is still wet. There you have one of the most iconic Cape Stream flies there is.